A lot can happen in 17 years. We could have families break apart, lose loved ones, businesses grow and fall. And yes, the landscape for the console war can definitely shift, and that's the most important thing. But I just got done with the first episode of Isekai Uncle, or Uncle from Another World, a series that is now airing in the summer 2022 anime season. It is unfortunately on Netflix, which I believe is slightly delayed to release, but they're planning on doing simulcast in the North America region, but we'll have to wait and see that. But either way, this is my thoughts on the first episode, so let's jump right into it. Uncle from Another World opens up with Takafumi, who's going to visit his uncle, and as he's walking to his uncle's place, a truck starts barreling down the road and doesn't hit him. And then he goes into the hospital. I liked how they did that. That was funny. He goes into the hospital and come to find out his uncle, who has been in a coma for 17 years, has now finally awakened. But there's one weird little problem, is his uncle believes that he was in another world that entire 17 years. He's talking gibberish, like some weird language. He's talking about all these experiences of the world, and yeah, it's obviously hard for Takafumi to really kind of believe that. This is where it gets a little heavy in the idea that, you know, his uncle's obviously wondering what happened with his family, and Takafumi's like, you know, look, you've been in a coma for 17 years. The entire family has broken apart, fighting over what was going to happen with you. Are they going to keep you around? Where are they going to move you? All that kind of stuff. And additionally, hey, I'm going to have to cut you off. There's a little bit of discussion there on who's going to take care of this guy now that he's finally awakened. But that all kind of changes as his uncle is really trying to press on him that he's obviously knows powers, and he's going to prove to him that he's in this other world. He immediately starts to try to cast a spell on a bottle. Nothing happens. But then eventually he says the same spell, but he says it in Japanese, and suddenly the magic actually happens. And this is what really kind of shocks Takafumi, and he immediately rips up this paperwork about trying to, you know, shoo him off to disability or something like that. So Takafumi now believes that I can now use Uncle's powers to make money. And so thus begins this whole thing where on one end, he's trying to figure out some way of exploiting his uncle to make money for them to be, you know, to be taken care of. But the other end is this whole thing where his uncle's trying to tell him about these stories about his experiences in this other world. And yes, how kind of dysfunctional this uncle is, really. So my thoughts on Uncle from Another World, I'm actually like half and half with this show. Like half of the stuff I really do enjoy, and half of the stuff is very lull. Like this first episode had like this real even split of me just being like, oh, this is great. I really like what they're doing here, to just me going, yeah, that's fish out of water stuff. Like a lot of the jokes is really playing heavily on the fact that the uncle is experiencing things for the first time, you know, increases in technology and all this kind of stuff. And yes, him being stuck on the idea of having a button phone versus a touchscreen. That's the stuff where it's like, yeah, that's funny. He learned about touchscreens. Oh, yeah, he learned about information and technology. It's just fish out of water stuff that we've always seen. Like we've seen a ton of times. But it's in the little nuggets of like him showing his nephew these experiences in his other life, and he can actually project a screen, like a magic screen, where he's able to see these memories in his mind of these events that happen in the other world. And not only that, but he's able to actually pan out and zoom and pitch and zoom and rotate so he can see everything that happened around him. And yes, even things that he himself didn't see. But I do like the element of inserting not just it being these memories of this past life, because that was the thing that I got from the synopsis was, oh, this is going to be a guy that's telling these crazy stories. And the only reason that his nephew believes it is because, oh, he just described a tsundere. No, he's literally showing him magic. He's literally showing him things. His interdimensional pocket of cash that he can pull anything out of. That kind of stuff is obviously just out of our world. And yes, technically flying. But I do get a kick out of that stuff. I get a kick out of introducing the stories of his previous life, this elf that's super tsundere, the magic, the reaction that he has to that kind of stuff. And yes, kind of seeing these experiences, which does have me questioning, I mean, what are they going to be doing going forward? I kind of have a feeling the series is going to be kind of a mixture of, yes, the fish out of water stuff that I don't care for, him showing these memories of events that happened in the previous world, and then the last segment is going to be really him bringing that magic to this world and doing things with that magic or equipment that affects the real world that we're in. I think that's going to be that happy balance that they're going to be doing that I think is going to be pretty solid. Now, the unfortunate thing with this series is it doesn't look the greatest. We're talking like very basic animation here, very low levels of animation. Nothing really moves very well. There's like a brief few scenes throughout like the flashbacks and the memories of the previous world that they did a pretty good job on, but for the most part, nothing's really well animated. Even the intro is nothing but CGI flying around combat, which they try to make it look like, you know, Sega Saturn and all that kind of stuff, which I get it. I get what they were doing there, but it's still rough. But I do admit that plays heavily into the uncle who has this huge fascination with Sega. I mean, the idea that they lost the console war is detrimental to him, which kind of leads into one of the more interesting, but I question jokes about this whole story, at least so far with the first episode, is it plays heavily on this idea that he'll ask something or he'll learn something, and then he'll immediately write it down in his notebook, and then he'll use a spell on himself so that he forgets it, so that he doesn't remember all these horrible memories, but if he ever wants to look at it, he can look in his notebook. And yes, so then losing the console war is something he immediately wants to get rid of from his mind after he writes it down. But then I realized something very quickly. The whole joke for the opening act was that he was trying to use a spell on something, but it wouldn't work. And then he realized at some point that if he uses Japanese when he says the spell, suddenly it works. But yet, him always erasing memories he was using this language from this previous world, so how is it working? So, crazy dark theory here. He just wants people to believe that he forgets, but he never forgets. Because he's using the language from the previous world, so the spell shouldn't work to erase his memories. So that was kind of funny when I realized that. And obviously he was using that before he figured out the whole Japanese language thing. But it's goofy in that regard. I kind of put it in my preview that this show can either take off or be a dud. And I honestly, I'm falling in the middle area. So I'm incorrect in that theory because it's really in each skit. And I feel like it's bouncing back and forth between the two of them. And so I do have a lot of interest for what's going forward, honestly. I think it's got a really good solid setup. And based on the PV and the key art, it's implying that more people will come back to this world. I don't know if that's true yet, but I would be very glad to see if possibly the elf would come to the real world. That would be a lot more fun with the whole fish out of water aspect, to have a tsundere elf come over. But I don't know. My brother was saying that he really didn't like the show because of how mean the uncle was to the elf. And I was thinking to myself, they both were terrible to each other. We have a tsundere elf that calls him ugly as an orc, because the whole joke with him in the other world was that he wasn't as attractive as everybody else. Like, this world is like a Tsukimichi Millet fantasy world where everybody is gorgeous. And so when he goes over there, he was seen as like an orc variant. And so everybody hunted him down. And the elf was the only one that kind of was nice to him. And so you have these scenes where she's like, I'm the only one that can stomach your orc-like appearance. And she obviously being tsundere and saying these terrible things about him while still following him everywhere. And so he does equally terrible things to her, not purposely. He's just an idiot. So he gives her a ring to you know, as a repayment to her. And she obviously knows that this is meaning like he wants to marry her. And then eventually when they get to town, he takes the ring off her finger and goes and sells it and gives her the money for it. And so it's like this terrible thing he does. But then yet she keeps following him everywhere. Like, no matter where I went, which town I went to, she would just suddenly appear. Like, she was there. They're equally terrible to each other, which makes that just really funny. The lady that he saved... Oh, I almost forgot. There's one point where he talks about this experience with a female. Like, because they're, like, talking about, I don't know... Uncle thinks that he wants to talk about love. And at some point he's talking about how he had this experience with a lady once where he was walking down this area and he noticed this big monster was attacking this lady and these two kids. And so he went in and saved them. And then he immediately turns to them, and it's implying because he's so ugly, she thought that he was a monster too. Like, oh, well, the two monsters fought each other and this one won, so I guess I'm gonna have to give myself this one. So she pats the head of the two kids like, you know, it's okay, I'll sacrifice myself. And she walks towards the uncle and, like, you know, gives him her hand. And then suddenly he says that two orcs attacked him from blind sight. And it's like, it's the two other kids that went around and beat him over the head. I'm like, this world sucks. So I think that's going to probably be a huge part of the comedy, is just how absurd this other world is. And just, again, it's kind of, again, that Tsukimichi Moonlit Fantasy thing where it seems like everybody in that other world are terrible people and they really mistreat the main character. I'll be interested to see how that kind of plays out. But obviously, from what we've seen so far with his experience in this other world, from these few brief memories, there's a reason why Uncle is so screwed up in the head, obviously. So we'll see how it goes from here. But again, I'm half enjoying the show. It has some really great points in it. There's just some lulling points in there, but I hope you guys enjoyed my first impressions. If you did, make sure to hit that like button down below. Comment, let me know what you thought of the series if you're going to be checking it out. Subscribe to the channel if you've not already. I'm doing first impressions of all the shows of the season, as well as episode by episode impressions of certain shows that I choose, as well as news, reviews. If it's anime, it's pretty much here. Additionally, if you want to support more, we have a Patreon link, a tips link, and a super thanks button down below. I definitely appreciate everybody that supports us, and y'all take care.